Preface of Wulf the Saxon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter Keeble. Wulf the Saxon, A Story of the Norman Conquest, by George Henty. Although the immediate results of the Battle of Hastings may have been of less importance to the world than were those of some other great battles, the struggle has in the long run had a greater influence upon the destiny of mankind than any other similar event that has ever taken place. That admixture of Saxon, Danish and British races, which had come to be known under the general name of English, was in most respects far behind the rest of Europe. The island was, as it had always been, except during the rule of 2 or 3 exceptionally strong kings, distracted by internal dissensions. Broad lines of division still separated the north from the south, and under weak kings the powerful earls became almost independent. The enterprise that had distinguished their Saxon and Danish ancestors seems to have died out. There was a general indisposition to change, and except in her ecclesiastical buildings, England made but little progress in civilization from the time of Alfred to that of Harold. Its insular position cut it off from taking part in that rapid advance which, beginning in Italy, was extending throughout Europe. The arrival, however, of the impetuous Norman race, securing as it did a close connection with the continent, quickened the intellect of the people, raised their intelligence, was of benefit to the English, and played a most important part in raising England among the nations. Moreover, it has helped to produce the race that has peopled Northern America, Australia, and the south of Africa, holds possession of India, and stands forth as the greatest civilizer in the world. The conquest of England by the Normans was achieved without even a shadow of right or justice. It was at the time an unmixed curse to England, but now we can recognize the enormous benefits that accrued when in his turn the Englishman conquered the Norman, and the foreign invaders became an integral portion of the people they had overcome. For the historical details of the story I have only had to go to Freeman's magnificent history of the Norman conquest of England, which I hope will be perused by all of my readers who are able to obtain it. G. A. Henty. End of preface. Chapter 1 of Wulf the Saxon by George Henty. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A quarrel. The great abbey at Westminster was approaching its completion. An army of masons and labourers swarmed like bees upon it and around it, and although differing widely in its massive architecture, with round Saxon windows and arches, from the edifice that was 2 or 3 generations later to be reared in its place, to serve as a still more fitting tomb for the ashes of its pious founder, it was a stately abbey, rivalling the most famous of the English fanes of the period. From his palace hard by, King Edward had watched with the deepest interest in the erection of the minster that was the dearest object of his life. The king was surrounded by Normans, the people among whom he had lived until called from his retirement to ascend the throne of England, and whom he loved far better than those over whom he reigned. He himself still lived almost the life of a recluse. He was sincerely anxious for the good of his people, but took small pains to ensure it, his life being largely passed in religious devotions and in watching over the rise of the abbey he had founded. A town had risen around minster and palace, and here the workmen employed found their lodgings, while craftsmen of all descriptions administered to the wants of both of those and the nobles of Edward's court. From one of the side doors of the palace a page, some 15 or 16 years of age, ran down the steps in haste. He was evidently a Saxon by his fair hair and fresh complexion, and any observer of the time would have seen that he must therefore be in the employment of Earl Harold, the great minister, who had for many years virtually ruled England in the name of its king. The young page was strongly and sturdily built. His garb was an English one, but with some admixture of Norman fashions. He wore tightly fitting leg coverings, a garment somewhat resembling a blouse of blue cloth, girded in by a belt at the waist, and falling in folds to the knee. Over his shoulders hung a short mantle of orange colour with a hood. On his head was a cap with a wide brim that was turned up closely behind, and projected in a pointed shovel shape in front. In his belt was a small dagger. He wore shoes of light yellow leather, fastened by bands over the insteps. As he ran down the steps of the palace he came into sharp contact with another page, who had just turned the corner of the street. "I crave your pardon, Walter Fitzurse," he said hurriedly, "but I was in haste and saw you not." The other lad was as clearly a Norman as the speaker was a Saxon. He was perhaps a year the senior in point of age, and taller by half a head, but was of slighter build. The expression of his face differed as widely from that of the Saxon as did his swarthy complexion and dark hair, for while the latter face wore a frank and pleasant expression, that of the Norman was haughty and arrogant. "You did it on purpose," he said angrily, "and were we not under the shadow of the palace I would chastise you as you deserve." The smile died suddenly out from the Saxon's face. "Chastise me?" he repeated. "You would find it somewhat difficult, Master Fitzurse. Do you think you are talking to a Norman serf? You will please to remember you are in England. But if you are not satisfied with my apology, I will ride with you a few miles into the country, and we will then try with equal arms where the chastisement is to fall." The Norman put his hand to his dagger, but there was an ominous growl from some men who had paused to listen to the quarrel. "You are an insolent boor, Wulf of Steyning, and some day I will punish you as you deserve." "Some day," the Saxon laughed. "We shall, I hope, see you all and your tribe sent across the Channel. There are few of us here who would not see your backs with pleasure." "What is this?" an imperious voice demanded, and turning round Wulf saw William, the Norman Bishop of London, who, followed by several monks and pages, had pushed his way through the crowd. "Walter Fitzurse, what means this altercation?" "The Saxon ran against me of set purpose, my lord," Walter Fitzurse said, in tones of deep humility, "and because I complained he challenged me to ride with him into the country to fight, and then he said he hoped that some day all Normans would be sent across the Channel." "Is this so?" the prelate said sternly to Wulf. "Did you thus insult not only my page but all of us, his countrymen?" "I ran against him by accident," Wulf said, looking up fearlessly in the prelate's face. "I apologize, though I know not that I was more in fault than he." But instead of taking my apology as one of gentle blood should do, he spoke like a churl, and threatened me with chastisement. And then did I say that I hoped he and all other Normans in the land would some day be packed across the Channel. Your ears ought to be slit as an insolent varlet." "I meant no insolence, my lord bishop, and as to the slitting of my ears, I fancy Earl Harold, my master, would have something to say on that score." The prelate was about to reply, but glancing at the angry faces of the growing crowd, he said coldly, "I shall lay the matter before him. Come, Walter, enough of this. You are also somewhat to blame for not having received more courteously the apologies of this saucy page." The crowd fell back with angry mutterings as he turned, and followed by Walter Fitzurse and the ecclesiastics, he made his way along the street to the principal entrance of the palace. Without waiting to watch his departure, Wulf the Saxon page pushed his way through the crowd and went off at full speed to carry the message with which he had been charged. Our king is a good king, a squarely built man, whose bare arms, with the knotted muscles showing through the skin, and hands begrimed with charcoal, indicated that he was a smith, remarked to a gossip as the little crowd broke up, "But it is a grievous pity that he was brought up a Norman, still more that he was not left in peace to pass his life as a monk as he desired. He fills the land with his Normans. As soon as an English bishop dies, straightway a Norman is clapped into his place. All the offices at court are filled with them, and it is seldom a word of honest English is spoken in the palace. The Norman castles are rising over the land, and his favourites divide among them the territory of every English earl or thane who incurs the king's displeasure. Were it not for Earl Harold, one might as well be under Norman sway altogether." "Nay, nay, neighbour Ulred, matters are not so bad as that. I dare say they would have been as you say had it not been for Earl Godwin and his sons. But it was a great check that Godwin gave them when he returned after his banishment, and the Norman bishops and nobles hurried across the sea in a panic. For years now the king has left all matters in the hands of Harold, and is well content if only he can fast and pray like any monk, and give all his thoughts and treasure to the building of yonder abbey." "We want neither a monk nor a Norman over us," the smith said roughly, "still less one who is both Norman and monk. I would rather have a Dane like Canute, who was a strong man and a firm one, than this king, who I doubt not is full of good intentions, and is a holy and pious monarch, but who is not strong enough for a ruler. He leaves it to another to preserve England in peace, to keep in order the great earls of Mercia and the north, to hold the land against Harold of Norway, Sweyn and others, and above all to watch the Normans across the water. A monk is well enough in a convent, but truly 'tis bad for a country to have a monk as its king." "There have been some war-loving prelates, Ulred, men as ambitious as any of the great earls, and more dangerous because they have learning." "Ay, there have been great prelates," the smith agreed. "Look at Lyfing of Worcester, to whom next only to Godwin the king owed his throne. He was an Englishman first and a bishop afterwards, and it was proof if needed that a man can be a great churchman and a great patriot and statesman too. It was he rather than Godwin who overcame the opposition of the Danish party and got the Witan at last to acquiesce in the choice of London or Wessex, and to give their vote to Edward. Well was it he did so, for had he failed we should have had a greater struggle in England as when Alfred battled against the Danes. We of London and the men of Wessex under the great earl were bent upon being ruled by a prince of our own blood. The last two Danish kings had shown us that anything is better than being governed by the Northmen. It was Lyfing who persuaded the Earl of Mercia to side with Wessex rather than with Northumbria. But since Lyfing, what great Englishmen have we had in the church? Every bishopric was granted by Edward to Norman priests, until Godwin and his sons got the upper hand after their exile. Since then most of them have been given to Germans. It would seem that the king is so set against Englishmen that only by bringing in foreigners can Harold prevent all preferment going to Normans. But what is the consequence? They say now that our church is governed from Rome, whereas before Edward's time we Englishmen did not think of taking our orders from Italy. There will be trouble come of it all, neighbour. Perhaps not so long as Edward reigns, but at his death. There is but one of the royal race surviving, and he, like Edward, has lived all his life abroad. There can be no doubt what the choice of Englishmen will be. Harold has been our real ruler for years. He is wise and politic as well as brave, and a great general. He is our own earl and will assuredly be chosen. Then we shall have trouble with the Normans. Already they bear themselves as if they were our masters, and they will not give up their hold without a struggle. Men say that William their duke makes no secret of his hope to become master of England, in which case God help us all. But that won't come as long as Harold lives and Englishmen can wield a sword and battle axe. As for myself, I have patched many a Norman suit of armour, but by St. Swithin, I shall have far more pleasure in marring them than I have ever in mending them. Know you who were the boys who had that contention just now? The Norman is a page of William, our Norman bishop. I know no more of him than that. The other is Wulf, who is a ward and page of Earl Harold. His father was a thane of Staining in South Sussex, one of Godwin's men, and at his death 2 years ago Harold took the lad into his household, for he bore a great affection for Gurth, who had accompanied him in his pilgrimage to Rome, and fought by his side when he conquered the Welsh. It was there Gurth got the wound that at last brought about his death. Wulf has been to my smithy many times, sometimes about matters of repairs to arms, but more often, I think, to see my son Osgod. He had seen him once or twice in calling at the shop, when one day Osgod, who is somewhat given to mischief, was playing at ball. and drove it into the face of a son of one of the Norman lords at court. The boy drew his dagger, and there would have been bloodshed, but Wulf, who was passing at the time, and saw that the thing was a pure mishap and not the result of set intention, threw himself between them. There was a great fuss over it, for the boy took his tale to his father, who demanded that Osgod should be punished, and would have doubtless gained his end had not Wulf spoken to Earl Harold, who intervened in the matter and persuaded the Norman to let it drop. Since then the boys have been great friends in their way. Osgod is a year older than the young thane, and has already made up his mind to be his man when he grows up, and he has got me to agree to it, though I would rather that he had stuck to my handicraft. Still, the prospect is not a bad one. Harold will be king of England, Wulf will be a powerful thane, and will doubtless some day hold high place at court, and he seems to have taken a real liking to Osgod. The boy may have good chances. Wulf will make a good fighting man one of these days. Harold sees that all his pages are well instructed in arms, and the two boys often have a bout with blunted swords when Wulf comes to my smithy. And, by my faith, though I have taught Osgod myself, and he already uses arms well, the young thane is fully a match for him. You would hardly believe that the boy can read as well as a monk, but it is so. Earl Harold, you know, thinks a good deal of education, and has founded a college at Waltham. He persuaded Wulf's father to send him there, and indeed will take none as his pages unless they can read. I see not what good reading can do to most men, but doubtless for one who is at court and may hold some day a high post there, it is useful to be able to read deeds and grants of estates, instead of having to trust others' interpretation. I wondered to see you press forward so suddenly in the crowd, neighbour, seeing that you are a busy man, but I understand now that you had an interest in the affair. That had I. I was holding myself in readiness, if that Norman boy drew his dagger, to give him such a blow across the wrist with my cudgel that it would be long before he handled a weapon again. I fear Wulf has got himself into trouble. The bishop will doubtless complain to the king of the language used by one of Harold's pages, and though the earl is well able to see that no harm comes to the lad, it is likely he will send him away to his estates for a time, for he strives always to avoid quarrels and disputes, and though he will not give way a jot in matters where it seems to him that the good of the realm is concerned, he will go to much further lengths than most men would do in the way of conciliation. Look how he was born with Tostig and the Earls of Mercia. He seems to have no animosity in his nature, but is ready to forgive all injuries as soon as pardon is asked. The smith was not far wrong in his opinion as to what was likely to happen. As soon as Wulf returned to the palace he was told that the earl desired his presence, and he proceeded at once to the apartment where Harold transacted public business. It was a hall of considerable size. The floor was strewed with rushes. 3 scribes sat at a table, and to them the earl dictated his replies and decisions on the various matters brought before him. When he saw Wulf enter he rose from his seat, and beckoning him to follow, pushed aside the hangings across a door leading to an apartment behind, and went in. Wulf had no fear whatever of any severe consequence to himself from his quarrel with Walter Fitz-Urse, but he was ashamed that his thoughtlessness should have given the slightest trouble to the earl, for popular as he was among all classes of men in southern England, Harold was an object of love as well as respect to his dependents, and indeed to all who came in close contact with him. The earl was now 41 years of age. He was very tall and was considered the strongest man in England. His face was singularly handsome, with an expression of mingled gentleness and firmness. His bearing was courteous to all. He united a frank and straightforward manner with a polished address rare amongst his rough countrymen. Harold had travelled more and farther than any Englishman of his age. He had visited foreign courts and mingled with people more advanced in civilization than were those of England or Normandy, and was centuries ahead of the mass of his countrymen. He was an ardent advocate of education, a strong supporter of the national church, an upholder of the rights of all men, and although he occasionally gave way to bursts of passion, was of a singularly sweet and forgiving disposition. King Edward was respected by his people because, coming after two utterly worthless kings, he had an earnest desire for their good, although that desire seldom led to any very active results. He was a member of their own royal house, he was deeply religious, his life was pure and simple, and although his tastes and sympathies were with the land in which he had been brought up, Englishmen forgave him this, because at least he was a Saxon, while his predecessors had been Danes. But while they respected Edward, for Harold, their real ruler, they felt a passionate admiration. He was a worthy representative of all that was best in the Saxon character. He possessed in an eminent degree the openness of nature, the frank liberality, the indomitable bravery, and the endurance of hardship that distinguished the race. He was Earl of the West Saxons, and as such had special claims to their fealty. London, it was true, did not lie in his earldom, but in that of his brother Leofwin. But Leofwin and Harold were as one, true brothers in heart and in disposition. The gentleness and courtesy of manner that, although natural, had been softened and increased by Harold's contact with foreigners, was not only pardoned but admired, because he was England's champion against foreigners. He had fought, and victoriously, alike against the Norwegians, the Danes of Northumbria, and the Welsh, and he struggled as sturdily though peacefully against Norman influence in England. Already the dread of Norman preponderance was present in the minds of Englishmen. It was no secret that in his early days Edward had held out hopes, if he had not given an actual promise, to William of Normandy that he should succeed him. Of late the king had been somewhat weaned from his Norman predilections, and had placed himself unreservedly in Harold's hands, giving to the latter all real power, while he confined himself to the discharge of religious exercises, and to the supervision of the building of his abbey, varied occasionally by hunting expeditions, for he still retained a passionate love of the chase. But men knew that the warlike Duke of Normandy would not be likely to forget the promise, and that trouble might come to England from over the sea. Harold, then, they not only regarded as their present ruler, but as their future king, and as their national leader and champion. Edward had no children. The royal house was extinct, save for Edward of the Atheling, who, like the present king, had lived all his life abroad, and could have no sympathy with Englishmen. There being then no one of the royal house available, but who Harold, the head of the great house of Godwin, the Earl of the West Saxons, the virtual ruler of England, could be chosen. The English kings, although generally selected from the royal house, ruled rather by the election of the people, as declared by their representatives in the Witan, than by their hereditary right. The prince next in succession by blood might at the death of the sovereign be called king, but he was not really a monarch until elected by the Witan and formally consecrated. It had been 9 months after he had been acclaimed to the throne by the people of London that King Edward had been elected king by the Witan and formally enthroned. Thus, then, the fact that Harold did not belong to the royal family mattered not but little in the eyes of Englishmen. To them belonged the right of choosing their own monarch, and if they chose him, who was to say them nay? Wulf felt uncomfortable as he followed the stately figure into the inner room, but he faced the earl as the door closed behind him with a fearless a look as that with which he had stood before the haughty prelate of London. A slight smile played upon Harold's face as he looked down upon the boy. "You are a troublesome varlet, Wulf, and the Lord Bishop has been making serious complaint of you to the king. He says you brawled with his page, Walter Fitzurse, that you used insolent words against his countrymen, and that you even withstood himself. What have you to say to this?" "The brawling was on the part of the bishop's page and not of mine, my lord. I was running out to carry the message with which you had charged me to Ernulf of Dover when I ran against Fitzurse. That was not my fault, but a pure mischance. Nevertheless, I expressed my regret in fitting terms. Instead of accepting them, he spoke insolently, talked of chastising me, and put his hand on the hilt of his dagger. Then, my lord, I grew angry too. Why should I, the page of Earl Harold, submit to be thus contemptuously spoken to by this young Norman, who is but the page of an upstart bishop, and whom, if your lordship will give permission, I would right willingly fight, with swords or any other weapons. Doubtless in my anger I did not speak respectfully of Walter's countrymen, and for this I am sorry, since it has been the ground of complaint and of trouble to you. In fact, Wulf, you spoke as a quarrelsome boy, and not as the page of one who has the cares of this kingdom on his shoulders, and whose great desire is to keep peace between all parties," the earl put in gravely. For the first time Wulf hung his head.